Nancy Guthrie was stone deaf at night. At 9:50 p.m., January 31st, 2026, her garage door closes. Her son-in-law, Tomaso Chiabra, watches it seal shut before driving into the Arizona night, leaving her until 1:47 a.m. On February the 1st, the doorbell camera at Nancy's front door suddenly disconnects from the network and goes dark. 3 hours and 57 minutes separate these two events. That 4-hour gap has appeared in every timeline and press conference summary. Every news report since February 1st mentions it. In over 50 days of national coverage, the number remains constant. Yet, not one reporter, analyst, or anchor has stopped to ask the question sitting directly inside those 4 hours. Why wait until 2 a.m.? Why not midnight, or just 1 hour after she safely arrived home? He did not move when Tomaso left or at 11 p.m., while the neighborhood was still occasionally active. He waited with chilling patience for nearly 4 hours until 2 a.m., a choice that reveals a terrifying predator. Because the answer does more than just explain his timing. It reveals the operational intelligence behind this crime at a level that the public has not yet heard clearly articulated. And it tells us something the evidence strongly supports, but that has never been said directly to the public. This was not someone who improvised their timing or who got lucky with a random 4-hour window of opportunity. This was a predator who understood precisely why 2 a.m. was the correct hour to finally take action. He studied the biology, the logistics, and the pharmacology. He chose the optimal moment with the same precision he brought to every other element of this kidnapping operation. Tonight, we examine those 4 hours and the person waiting in the dark. Why choose 2 a.m.? We examine 4 compounding reasons that each explain the timing on their own merit. Together, they reveal a level of planning that investigators call unprecedented for a residential abduction case. Subscribe and hit the notification bell right now. Here at the investigation room, we follow the evidence. We examine what the facts tell us about the person behind this crime and ask the questions the media ignores. Nancy Guthrie's case deserves this deep investigative analysis. We drop documentaries weekly. If you are following this case, hit like and tell me your thoughts in the comments. Before today, had you ever asked why he waited? What does 2 a.m. say about who he is? Leave your thoughts below. I read every one. Now, let's examine the woman he was hunting. Nancy Guthrie Nay Long was 84 years old on the night she was taken from her Tucson home. A widow since 1988, she had lived in the same Catalina Foothills house for more than 50 years. Her neighborhood was quiet and affluent, set against the Santa Catalina Mountains. The property sat west of North Campbell Avenue and south of East Skyline Drive, near the mountain base. Sheriff Chris Nanos described her as sharp as a tack. She had no cognitive impairment. Nancy was no wanderer. She knew exactly who she was and where she belonged at all times. Physically, she could not walk 50 yards unassisted and required daily medication. A Medtronic pacemaker regulated her heart rhythm, syncing via Bluetooth directly to an app on her iPhone. She wore hearing aids. Removing them at night left her completely deaf to the world. Her daughter Savannah Guthrie anchors the Today Show, while her other daughter Annie lives in Tucson. Tomaso Chiabra drove Nancy home from Annie's on the evening of January 31st, 2026. He waited until the garage closed at 9:50 p.m., then drove away into the dark night. For nearly 4 hours, the house was quiet as the lights moved from room to room. A bedroom window finally dimmed to nothing. Somewhere outside, he waited in the shadows. He had been to this address before on January 11th and January 24th. Both times he learned and observed, generating zero calls or concern from any residents in the neighborhood. He knew the routines. On the night of January 31st, he chose to act, but he did not act immediately. He waited for 2 a.m. That choice reveals his operational plan. To understand those 4 hours, you must see them as deliberate, calculated, tactical time. He used that time for confirmation, waiting until every single variable was perfectly aligned. Law enforcement sources confirmed to Fox News Digital that he was caught on camera at her door days earlier. He returned on January 24th, long before Tomaso Chiabra's vehicle vanished on January 31st. This individual had already scouted the address twice to map the cameras. He scrutinized the approach and the entire neighborhood, so those 4 hours weren't spent learning the property layout. He knew the land. He used those 4 hours for a chillingly specific purpose: to ensure the timing was lethal. There are 4 distinct, compounding reasons why 2 a.m. was the exact moment he decided to strike. Each reason alone justifies the timing. Together, they reveal tactical calculations that former FBI profiler Mary Ellen O'Toole finds deeply alarming. As the forensic science director at George Mason University, she recognizes the behavior of a professional. She described this publicly as evidence of a predator who invested massive planning into the hit. Why the wait? The simplest logic for stalling 4 hours is that a house doesn't fall silent the second a garage closes. Consider the routine of an 84-year-old woman returning from a 4-hour family dinner. She's exhausted. She likely ate a heavy meal. She's been out since 5:32 in the afternoon. It's nearly 10 p.m. when she arrives. But sleep isn't immediate. She has to take her medication. She moves through the rooms. A living room light dies. Then a hallway light tracks her toward the bedroom. The bathroom light glows. The bedroom lamp softens, stays dim, and finally, the entire house goes dark. That migration of light from the entrance to the bedroom takes significant time to finish. For an 84-year-old woman settling in, that sequence often lasts between 30 minutes and a full hour. Maybe the television stays on. Perhaps a kitchen light flicks back on briefly. These are tiny signals that a watcher with a clear line of sight can read without stepping on the property. From his vantage point, the suspect had already identified these observation posts on January 11th and 24th. A patient predator reads those lights like a text message, tracking her movement room by room. He waits until the last light stays dead long enough to confirm the occupant is no longer moving. He didn't guess when Nancy was asleep. He watched until he knew. That process requires real time, actual time, not the 20 minutes an impatient amateur might allow. He needed verified stillness from an 84-year-old who went to bed after a long Saturday and hasn't moved. That confirmation takes patience. It requires a discipline that doesn't come from impulse or sudden opportunity. It comes from a mind that understands that total certainty, not speed, was the operational priority. By midnight, her house was likely pitch black, but he stayed. He gave the shadows more time. He waited for 2 a.m. because of a physiological trap documented in human biology. Decades of research in FBI behavioral unit databases have established a chillingly consistent pattern. High-level intruders consistently select a window between 1:30 and 3 a.m. as their strike time. This isn't coincidence. It's the exploitation of biology. The human circadian rhythm hits its lowest point then. Cognitive function, body temperature, and neurological alertness all crater in the early morning hours. By 2 a.m., a person who slept before midnight is locked in a state of deepened unconsciousness. Their hearing sensitivity drops. Their reaction time slows to a crawl. The fight or flight response is suppressed, meaning the probability of waking up is at a statistical minimum. For the victim, 2 a.m. is when their biology works against them and in favor of the intruder. This is verified behavioral science, not just a guess. Analyzed across hundreds of FBI abduction cases, the empirical findings are remarkably consistent. The most calculated residential crimes happen almost exclusively in that 1:30 to 3 a.m. window. It's not for convenience, but because the predator understood the physiology of the person they targeted. Nancy Guthrie was 84. Her physiology at 2 a.m. represented a peak state of vulnerability. After a long social evening and her routine, she was likely in her maximum depth of sleep. Her alert response was suppressed, her hearing was blunted, and her ability to wake was gone. He didn't just pick 2 a.m. for the darkness, he was waiting for her medication to finish the job for him. He struck then because he knew that an 84-year-old woman reaches her absolute peak of biological vulnerability and weakness at 2 o'clock. This is not the work of a man acting on a sudden, reckless impulse. This is the calculated move of someone who studied how an 84-year-old body reacts to the freezing early hours of a February morning. There is a third logistical reason for this timing. and it ties directly into the hard physical evidence found by investigators. Neighbors Elias and Danielle Stratigiulias owned a Ring camera, located roughly 2.5 miles away from Nancy's residence. It caught a car heading south on Camino Real at 2:36 a.m. on February 1st, just 8 minutes after Nancy's pacemaker signal died. Police recovered a glove matching the one seen in the doorbell footage about 2 miles away from the scene of the kidnapping. These two clues map out a clear path, showing a getaway heading south toward a border crossing only 60 miles away. They also establish a tight timeline, 8 minutes between the moment someone severed her pacemaker signal and that car hitting the camera. You don't find that path by accident. The driver caught on Camino Royale at 2:36 wasn't just taking a late-night cruise. A kidnapper who just snatched an 84-year-old from a secure house needs a pre-planned exit strategy if they want to survive. They need a specific route that bypasses every major intersection during the peak of the crime. They need a path through quiet residential streets where they already know which cameras are watching and how to avoid them. This was a staged operation. At 9:50 p.m., when Tomaso Chiabra left the driveway, the entire neighborhood was still wide awake. A strange truck sitting there at 10 p.m. would eventually draw a crowd of curious eyes. A neighbor out for a late walk at 10:30 might memorize a suspicious license plate. Even at 11, a parked vehicle looks odd. But at 2 a.m., in the Catalina Foothills, the Arizona desert becomes a total graveyard. A car parked in a strategic spot attracts zero attention and zero reports because there isn't a single person left awake. That window from 1:30 to 3 a.m. isn't just the time when the victim falls into her deepest possible sleep inside the house. It is also the dead zone where the entire neighborhood completely stops paying attention to the world outside. The kidnapper needed his getaway vehicle to remain a total ghost for hours on end. He needed the locals to ignore an unfamiliar car, and by timing his hit for 2 a.m., he finally vanished. He got away clean. Now, Brian Enton reports that the FBI is aggressively grilling neighbors about every contractor who worked nearby. They are hunting for landscapers, construction crews, or any service workers who had legitimate access to the foothills before the snatch. Someone sat near that property for 4 hours on January 31st without triggering a single alarm or suspicious call from a resident. That eerie silence isn't a coincidence, and the feds are desperate to find out why no one noticed. But there is a fourth reason for the 2 a.m. timing that no analyst or news outlet has dared to mention yet. It has been 50 days, and this remains the most chillingly calculated part of the entire kidnapping timeline. Nancy Young depends on life-saving daily medication. Sheriff Chris Nanos made this clear in the very first briefing, and it has remained the heartbeat of the search ever since. Her meds are so critical to her survival that they became the primary reason for the life-or-death urgency of the case. Nancy lives with a pacemaker. She deals with the typical chronic conditions of an 84-year-old managing a heart condition and the heavy physical toll of age. The prescriptions for a patient with this specific medical profile are very telling. Common drugs for heart support and blood pressure often reach their peak sedative or pharmacological effect exactly 4 to 6 hours after ingestion. If Nancy followed her routine and took her pills between 8 and 10 p.m. on that Saturday night, then by 2 in the morning, she would be entering a state of total pharmacological vulnerability as her body processed the medicine. At that exact hour, the chemical depth of her medication's effect would be hitting its absolute maximum. We aren't guessing about her specific prescriptions, as those details aren't public, and we make no claims about her exact medical compounds. This is about the cold science of pharmacological timing. It is about what happens when a woman her age has been asleep for 3 hours while her medicine peaks in her system. Did the person who planned this crime know enough about Nancy's medical history and her nightly routine? Did they know her medication schedule? Did they pick 2 a.m. because they knew she'd be too sedated to offer any resistance? No investigator has raised this question publicly yet. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's heart was still beating, but she had already crossed a digital point of no return. While no analyst has stated it, the pharmacological and biological timing converged exactly for a staged exit. Every single advantage this suspect constructed for himself hit its peak at exactly 2 in the morning. Not midnight, not 1, but 2. Stacking 4 independent variables into one perfect window is not a fluke. It is cold calculation. But what did he have in place before he moved? He had watched the house go dark and silent for nearly 2 hours before he finally approached Nancy Guthrie's front door at 1:47 a.m. He had physical confirmation that Nancy was no longer moving through the home. She had enough time to fall into the deepest sleep cycle possible for an 84-year-old in her condition. Her internal clock was at its biological minimum for alertness and response. The Catalina Foothills, at 1:47 a.m. in early February, were dead silent, making that neighborhood as operationally invisible as any residential area can be. The vehicle was staged and the exit route was set. He had already chosen the direction of travel toward the south. If her evening medication followed the standard schedule, it was hitting its maximum depth of effect. He waited until every gear clicked into place. One advantage is a reason to act, but he did not rely on just one. He stacked all 4: a silent house, a vulnerable body, a blind neighborhood, and a ready exit. Was this a professional hit? Retired FBI Special Agent Steve Moore thinks otherwise. As one of the most analytically precise voices examining this case, he gave a specific breakdown of the crime. In a CNN interview, he called it highly premeditated, saying the doorbell footage showed somebody who doesn't know what he doesn't know. He saw someone with extensive operational planning, but a total lack of professional training. That exact mix of thorough preparation and amateur execution is what that 2 a.m. timing reveals. This was someone who thought carefully and made deliberate strategic choices, but they were never trained by a professional criminal apparatus on how to actually pull it off. The timing was smart, but the rest, ripping vegetation from a garden pot to cover a camera, was the mark of imperfect execution. The gap between the plan and the performance is one of the most vital data points we have, but the camera saw more than he thought. At 1:47 a.m., the camera at Nancy's front door suddenly disconnected from the network. This was a network disconnect, not a power failure, and since the camera had no active food description, it could only loop and overwrite. The suspect or his accomplice knew this, or at least they tried to neutralize the camera anyway. They used a gloved hand first, then stuffed weeds from a nearby pot over the lens. But the FBI recovered the footage through residual data in Google's back-end systems. That data was preserved because the physical tampering triggered a system flag. 25 minutes later, at 2:12 a.m., something moved inside. That is when the interior camera software inside Nancy Guthrie's home detected motion. No image was captured, just an automated log entry of motion at a specific timestamp in that field. 16 minutes after that, at 2:28 a.m., Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from the Bluetooth app on her iPhone. Her phone was found sitting inside the home the following day. That Bluetooth signal only travels 10 to 15 feet, meaning at 2:28, Nancy was more than 15 feet from her phone. She was in a vehicle, and she was gone. The clock was ticking. Only 16 minutes passed from the first interior motion detection to Nancy being hauled out of her home and out of range. Morgan Wright, CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, analyzed this. He traveled to Tucson to examine the property and dissected that 16-minute window. Could an amateur move that fast? For someone improvising a kidnapping without a planned vehicle or exit, 16 minutes would be impossible. You cannot make a spontaneous decision to take a person and organize the removal logistics in 16 minutes. Not when the person requires physical assistance to move. Not in a secure home before dawn without someone already knowing where the car is and what happens next. But for someone who planned this, the speed makes sense. This suspect had a vehicle positioned right where the walkway meets the driveway, the exact spot where the blood evidence Morgan Wright observed ended. He already had a destination, an exit route, and a map of how to get from the house to the car. 16 minutes is not a tight window. It is the exact time required for execution. Nancy Guthrie never walked out of her home. She was carried like cargo by 2 separate individuals. Former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell analyzed the blood on the porch and reached this specific expert conclusion. DNA testing confirmed the droplets were hers. Her head tilted as they moved her, dragging blood across the surface. 2 people, a driver or lookout, and a primary mover. An operation with coordinated roles and a vehicle. A 16-minute window required everyone to know their assignment. They waited 4 hours to execute 16 minutes of work. That lopsided ratio is the signature of planning. To understand why the 2 a.m. timing was chosen, you must understand what the suspect did weeks before the move. FBI requests for neighbor footage targeted 2 prior dates, January 11th and January 24th, 2026. Both were Saturdays in the same neighborhood watch window. Fox News digital reporter Michael Ruiz provided the details. Citing 2 law enforcement sources, Ruiz confirmed the suspect was caught at Nancy Guthrie's home on January 11th. Not the February 1st figure with a backpack and weapon, but a shadow without equipment at her door watching. 3 weeks before he took her, he stood at her door and learned what he came to learn. He tested her environment. He confirmed camera angles, entry points, and sight lines from neighboring properties to see who was watching. He took in what he needed and left. On January 24th, 1 week before the abduction, he returned. The FBI's specific interest is telling. Neighbor interviews about that footage indicate that date was part of the operational pattern. A second visit and a second confirmation. Another Saturday, January 11th, reconnaissance. January 24th, confirmation. January 31st, execution. 3 consecutive Saturdays. The same day, the same neighborhood, the same target. A pattern so deliberate that investigators could identify the prior visits and connect them to the kidnapping night. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens through disciplined, cold-blooded planning. A crime this complex cannot succeed on the first attempt without prior intel. Was he watching her? Information gathering at this level requires multiple visits over several weeks to ensure the plan is perfect. By the time Tomaso Chiabra left Nancy's driveway at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st, the trap was set. The person waiting nearby had 3 Saturdays of observation. They knew every camera coverage in the neighborhood. They knew the approach angles and the timing of traffic on those surrounding streets. They knew how long her house stayed light after a Saturday dinner. They tested that on the 11th. They verified it on the 24th. On the 31st, they waited 4 hours to confirm it finally. The signature in the 2 a.m. timing and the 4-hour wait belongs to a specific offender documented by the FBI. Former profiler Mary Ellen Uhl, a 10-year veteran of the Behavioral Analysis Unit, currently directs forensic science at George Mason. Speaking on NPR, she described characteristics consistent with a classic organized and premeditated offender, someone who invests significant preparation and thinks through every possible contingency. The organized offender does not act until conditions are optimal. They are driven by a calculation of risk, not emotion. They wait until that calculation says the moment is correct. This type of offender is not deterred by time. Waiting does not make them anxious. The hours between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m. were not empty. Those were confirmation hours. Every minute the neighborhood stayed quiet, and every light that went dark added to the confirmation. The absence of unexpected activity proved that the operational moment was approaching exactly as he had planned it. Retired Agent Steve Moore analyzed the case and said directly that the crime was highly premeditated. He described a behavioral signature, someone who only acts when ready and defines ready through observable conditions, not emotions. That contrasts sharply with the execution. Moore also said the camera footage showed someone who simply doesn't know what he doesn't know. Without professional criminal training, his improvisational failures at the camera exposed the gap between planning and execution. A terrifying profile emerges from those observations. At 2:28 in the morning, Nancy Guthrie's heart was beating, but her link to the world was severed. The predator who took her knew her medicine schedule and exactly when her street would be most vulnerable. They spent weeks preparing, scouting the area 3 times without a single resident looking their way. This person understood the biology of sleep and the specific timing of Nancy's medication, realizing the tactical advantage of a 2 in the morning strike, yet they were so amateur, They had to hide a camera using a common garden plant because they couldn't improvise. This blend of high-level planning and clumsy execution is the most significant profile yet. It narrows the hunt. It describes a suspect with patience, intelligence, and deep local knowledge, but someone lacking professional criminal tradecraft. They figured this out alone. As Moore put it, he does not know what he does not know, and those blind spots are as loud as his precision in preparation. The 2 a.m. timing tells us who planned this, but it also reveals who can identify them. That 4-hour stakeout near Nancy's property required a physical position that was sustainable for hours without drawing any heat. From 9:50 p.m. to 1:47 a.m., this person maintained a presence to watch that house. A vehicle or a person sat on those streets for 4 straight hours on a Saturday night. Now, the Bureau wants names. They are looking for contractors, laborers, and service staff with regular access in January and February of 2026. Brian Enton's reporting, backed by multiple neighbor accounts, confirms that investigators are finally asking the right question. Was there someone whose regular presence in the foothills made them invisible? Whose truck on a corner, or whose silhouette on a sidewalk failed to trigger reports, no concern, and no second looks, despite a 4-hour window where they could have been noticed? Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Krieger says that vacant properties in the area are now a major investigative focus. An empty home nearby would offer the perfect cover to observe the target without being noticed. It is a position to monitor street patterns and property activity without a vehicle idling visibly on the corner. The FBI has confirmed they are currently examining such a property. This vacant home theory, plus the contractor canvas, suggests the 4-hour wait was hidden by a legitimate mask, a reason to be in the neighborhood that generated zero suspicion over a long period. And here is the chilling implication that has not been stated clearly enough in public coverage. If someone sat near Nancy's home for 4 hours and no neighbor called the police, they had that cover. That cover was either a familiar face who belonged there, or a physical hiding spot that allowed observation without visibility. In a place like the Catalina Foothills, both of those possibilities lead to the same person, someone with natural ambient access, someone whose presence felt normal. The FBI is looking for who that was. They have the question. The answer is likely a name on a list, or a neighbor's memory of a truck they saw twice. Perhaps a vehicle seen on the corner of Camino Royale on January 11th, on January 24th, and on January 31st. This connects to a timeline we have covered before that is now incredibly urgent. Nancy's pacemaker lost its link at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. A vehicle moved south 8 minutes later. Nancy was gone from her home. The family didn't report her missing until noon that Sunday when she failed to appear at her online church service. They arrived at her home. They found her phone, her purse, her car, and DNA-confirmed blood near the door, but no Nancy. 11 hours and 32 minutes passed between the pacemaker going silent and the family arriving at the home. That 9.5-hour gap is a window that investigators can never get back. That window is over. It exists only in the mind of the kidnapper. That is the cost of the 2 a.m. timing. By choosing an hour of maximum invisibility, the person who took Nancy Guthrie guaranteed a massive discovery delay. A crime at 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning from a home where the occupant was not expected to be seen until noon gives a suspect a 9-hour head start, providing more than enough time to reach a destination, to cross the border, and vanish into the desert, where the Pima County Sheriff and the FBI are still searching. A silent Bluetooth signal is currently broadcasting from a heart that may no longer be beating. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker has been pinging for 50 days, a digital ghost, born from the 4 hours he spent waiting. He chose 2 a.m. for 4 reasons, and that head start is the most consequential choice he made. It is late March, 2026, 50 days since Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, and the investigation remains high stakes and active. A $1.2 million bounty is currently on the table for any information. Florida technicians are processing DNA found inside the home, and genetic genealogy is currently being considered as the next logical step. That pacemaker signal continues to pulse its digital signature into the void. With 6 or 7 years of battery life remaining, electronic sniffer technology is scanning for that signal, though no suspects have been named to the public at this time. No arrests have been made, but a terrifyingly specific operational picture emerges when you analyze that 4-hour window of waiting. This was a predator who mastered the biology of sleep. They understood the timing of an elderly woman's medication and the operational value of striking at 2 a.m. in this neighborhood. They scouted this property twice to log every detail and staged a getaway vehicle exactly where the blood evidence ends, right where the walkway meets the driveway. They executed a 16-minute extraction using 2 people in highly coordinated, specific roles. They fled south toward the border in the 8 minutes between the pacemaker going silent and a camera recording their vehicle 2.5 miles away. This person is out there. They didn't just get lucky. They chose every detail of this strike, from timing to tools. They picked 2 a.m., and they chose it for 4 compounding reasons, any of which would justify the risk. They are hiding with their secret, but the math of 2 people and $1.2 million is not working in their favor. The pressure is rising, the risk of a partner talking grows, and the net is tightening around them every day. Forensics are closing the gap. The DNA will be matched. The genealogical analysis will run until it finds a name. Investigators are cross-referencing every byte of signal data against those 3 specific Saturdays to find a digital fingerprint. Every camera south of the foothills from February 1st is being mapped against what we know. Somewhere in that data, the 2 a.m. choice is waiting to be found. That deliberate, 4-hour stakeout will eventually lead the police straight back to the person who made it. There are several massive analytical questions this case raises that remain completely unresolved in the public eye. First, where was the lookout sitting for those 4 long hours? Someone watched Nancy's property from 10 p.m. to 1:47 a.m. without a single neighbor raising an alert. Was it a vehicle, a building, or that vacant property the FBI is currently investigating? Pinpointing that specific lookout spot is the key to cracking the entire logistics of those 4 hours. Second, has the signal data been checked for that window? Morgan Wright is hunting for device movement patterns. He is mapping device signatures from anonymous phone data, specifically looking for anyone moving during the abduction window. If a strange device appeared in the foothills during those 4 hours, the case is likely over. That data puts a specific phone in a specific spot. It may already be sitting in a folder. Third, what medications was Nancy taking? And do they explain why 2 a.m. was the perfect time to move? Medical records are protected, and this is a sensitive area, but the truth is in those files. This one detail would prove the kidnapper knew Nancy's internal chemistry better than she did herself. Fourth, a vehicle raced south on Camino Real at 2:36 a.m. Have they mapped every camera between her home and the nearest border to see where that vehicle went? The FBI has the digital muscle to track that license plate. The FBI has the digital power to track a single vehicle across the state. We don't know the results yet, but all 4 of these questions have findable answers that investigators are pursuing right now. The evidence required to answer them exists in some form. Every week without an arrest is another week of forensics moving toward the name of the man who waited in the dark. Analysts are processing the data right now. Who waited 4 hours in the dark? It was 9:50 p.m., January 31st. The garage door closes. The neighborhood goes silent. Then, at 1:47 a.m., on February 1st, the killer disconnects a camera. The wait was over. 4 hours. In that time, every variable the killer needed had finally aligned. The house went dark. Nancy slept deeply. The neighborhood went completely blind to the threat. Her medication followed its timing. This wasn't luck. It was cold, hard calculation. Nancy Guthrie was 84 and had lived there 50 years. That Saturday felt like every other night. Dinner with her daughter, the ride home, and the garage door closing. An intruder stood in the darkness for 4 hours, watching Nancy Guthrie from the outside. She settled in for the night, feeling only the ordinary safety of her home. Zuba simply went to sleep that evening. She has been missing for over 50 days now. She needs daily medication she has lacked for 50 days. Her family offered $1 million, but they still have no answers. Who turns down a $1 million cash reward? An intruder chose to wait 4 hours in the blackness before they finally took her. That choice defines them. The FBI is using every analytical tool to connect the evidence to the name behind that specific decision. If you were near the Catalina Foothills on January 31st, or if you spotted a vehicle or a person, speak up. Did you see a light where none belonged between 10 p.m. and 3 a.m.? Was anything out of place during that 5-hour window? Call 800. Call FBI. Tips are completely anonymous. The reward is $1.2 million. Every detail matters. What does that 2 a.m. timing tell you about who this person is? Is he a local resident now? Which of the 4 reasons for that timing do you find the most analytically significant? Post your analysis in the comments. Be respectful. This is about a real woman and a real family. We need answers. If you want forensically grounded, serious coverage that outlasts the news cycle, you must subscribe to the investigation room. We do not stop for anything. Click the notification bell. New documentaries drop weekly. We stay until we find the answers. This investigation was presented with total respect for Nancy Guthrie's family. We examine evidence to find the truth, not to sensationalize tragedy. We believe these cases deserve serious, thorough, and respectful coverage. Every single victim matters to our channel. Thank you for approaching this case with the serious gravity it deserves.